Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod, and I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, school is starting, and so is the debate over whether students benefit from having their phones in class. Yale lecturer Joanne Lipman on one side.
When the pocket calculator first came out, they were banned from schools because kids will never ever learn how to do math. So my point being, historically, every time we have these new technologies, there's a lot of fear about them. And then ultimately we learn how to use them as tools.
And on the other side, member of the Smartphone Free Childhood U.S. Council, Emily Boddy.
We really need kids to develop skills before screens. So there's critical thinking skills that come into play that will enable kids as they get older and their brain develops more to be able to use these tools more effectively.
Did you know the U.S. markets have an opportunity to invest directly in Ukraine? The country's largest digital and telecom operator, Kyivstar, is publicly traded on the Nasdaq in New York, and CEO Alexander Komarov joins our set.
This is a kind of proof that country can develop in a very, very difficult circumstances.
Those conversations, plus an org chart restructuring in tech thanks to AI, and today's court hearing of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook's lawsuit to block President Trump's effort to fire her.
The story of the week, it just kind of keeps developing.
It's Friday, August 29th, the last trading day of August. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Andrew by in 3, 2, 1. Up and Andrew. Cue.
Good morning and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin along with Leslie Picker and Wilfred Frost in for Joe and Becky on this final day of August as we get ready for the sprint, guys. I always think between Labor Day and basically Christmas, that is the sprint of the year. But we've had kind of a sprint this week, it feels like, given all the news. And it feels like there's a lot more coming at us.
Not just the final day of August, Andrew. It's your final day with Leslie and I.
Yeah, which I know makes you sad.
We're going to have to do this again.
A little bit of tears.
Can we make this a regular thing?
We can. And how
Final
about
week
this
of
as
August,
well?
Every August?
Every August.
You know, people think it's the dog days of August, but this isn't that.
And how about this, Andrew? Will you come and join me on my new breakfast show on Sky News in maybe a couple of months with your book coming out?
You have a deal. We've already there's been a handshake on that. So
I know. So luckily,
we sealed it with a live broadcast commitment.
Luckily, there wasn't a poly market on it. It wasn't insider trading. It's just been a deal that we're now publicly announcing.
Well, we should have put it on. We could have put it on Kalshi and then maybe had a separate side deal. More big news out of the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller saying he hopes the Fed cuts interest rates next month and expects more reductions in the next 3 to 6 months. Now, Waller telling that to the Economic Club of Miami, based on current data that he says supports a 0.25 percentage point cut at the Fed September meeting. He said he's concerned that labor market conditions could weaken quickly and says he doesn't want the Fed to be behind the curve. He noted he doesn't think the central bank needs to cut rates more than a 0.25 percentage point in September, but said that could change depending on next Friday's jobs report. Waller saying it's time to move monetary policy to a more neutral stance, which he said was around 3% on the federal funds rate. So a lot of folks going to key off of that. How much influence he has over Jay Powell or not, unclear, but given sort of the conversations around his name possibly even being up for the Fed governor, he may actually have more influence over this than it's maybe worth listening to what he's got to say in this context.
Yeah, absolutely. And he, along with Mickey Bowman, were the two dissenting votes last month where they said that the Fed should be cutting rates, ultimately decided to hold them steady. And he's been obviously, in favor of easing for a long time. But to your point, we hear about the prospect for rate cuts and all against this backdrop of kind of the politicization of the Fed, what it means in the context of this week's developments, what it means for kind of the credibility as inflation fighters and the dual mandate. And I think it's something that we'll be talking about for a while, just how much, the uncertainty kind of filters into some of these decisions.
What I love about this is for the existing members who are in the running to be Fed chair, they have to lay out their case, but with much greater kind of guardrails around them in a way that David Zervos can come on Squawk Box and be an uber dove and embrace all of the sort of angles that the president might want to hear. Obviously, for people like Waller, you have to be a bit more careful, but still set out your stool a little bit. But I think the implication for that is you kind of know for certain these sorts of members are not going to flip and be hawkish. Maybe that's a little bit too kind of skeptical of me, but I think if you're in the running, you're going to want to keep saying the right things for the foreseeable months.
Right. A hearing, speaking of, is set for later this morning on Fed Governor Lisa Cook's request to stop President Trump from removing her from office. Cook sued Trump earlier yesterday, claiming the president has no power to force her to leave. The administration is claiming Cook committed mortgage fraud related to homes in Michigan and Georgia. It's unclear if those allegations are true, and Cook's lawsuit suggests a clerical error may be to blame, but the move has generally been viewed as a pretext to get rid of an official appointed by former President Biden, who might not be as supportive of President Trump's call to cut interest rates. Last night, Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte saying he had filed a second criminal referral against Cook with the Department of Justice relating to a mortgage on a property in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There was a really interesting piece in the Journal this morning about so there are all of these different allegations of mortgage fraud. What were the mortgage agencies doing prior to this? Why didn't they catch it in the first place, essentially? Why didn't they have flags that would have, raised the alarm when this actually occurred? Why is it all kind of coming to light now?
It's really interesting to have her pushback, though. I mean, we've kind of been waiting for this all week, Andrew, haven't we? And clerical error is the response. And there's lots of other really interesting detail, and I know we've got some legal experts and Steve Leisman coming up in this filing, and obviously we're going to get the ultimate ruling before too long. And there's lots of legitimate areas where obviously fraud has not been proven, which one can understand in Lisa Cook's position. You feel would have to be done before any of this. But clerical error, it's basically saying, I think my reading of it, I signed it, but I didn't mean to, almost, or I filled out the form wrong. I mean, it's quite interesting. What do you take?
My take is it's troubling that there was not a more vociferous defense, if there happens to be one. It sounds to me like there may not be one. The clerical error, there was another word where they used the phrase erred, that maybe it was an erred, E-R-R-E-D. That unto itself, to me, I think even in this position, putting aside the criminality element of it, if you're on the board of governors, you have a responsibility, even perhaps more than most American citizens do. And so, having said that, by the way, we have not prosecuted, by the way, there's an AG who had this issue in the United States who has the job today. So, that's when you get into this idea of is this being weaponized? Last night, this new Pulte claim I thought was a stretch. So the first claim seems pretty clear cut given the documentation that's out there. It would be nice to hear what she actually has to say about it, and I think we should wait to hear that. But you'd want to know. Last night's claim was different. Last night's claim was that she had bought another property, claimed it as a second home, and then all of a sudden later it became an investment property, meaning that she was renting it out. There are lots of people in America who plan to buy something as a second home and then ultimately turn it into a rental home. And your decision about knowing what you're doing on day one versus knowing what you're doing even 10 days later is often different. So that one, for me, feels a little bit more of a stretch. Pulte's pulling that property into this mix in part because it was something that took place while she has been on the board of the Fed. So I don't know. We're going to have to watch this, and obviously we're going to talk to Steve and so many other people about this later.
Yeah, really, really interesting. It's been the story of the week. It just kind of keeps developing.
Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft are all slashing middle management, part of a broader shift in how tech operates in the AI era. Mackenzie Sigalos joins us now with more. Mackenzie, this is so interesting just in terms of organizational structure for these tech companies and kind of what makes them more nimble in this AI race.
Hey, good morning, Leslie. So building on your reporting on this exact topic earlier in the week, I spoke to the team at Stanford that's tracking real-time payroll data from ADP, and they found that the jobs most exposed to AI, like coding and accounting, have seen a 13% drop in employment for workers under 25. And losing that bottom rung, they say, is a warning sign of disruption that's moving up the ladder. And we're already seeing that show up in big tech. CNBC's Jen Elias learned that Alphabet cut 35% of its small team managers in the past year, a shift that's echoed at Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft. Mark Zuckerberg has long pushed to cut bloat, and at Amazon, Andy Jassy said the corporate workforce will shrink as generative AI tools take hold. He also told employees there were too many pre-meetings for the pre-meetings and ordered a 15% boost in the ratio of individual contributors to managers. A Yale professor studying the corporate organizational behavior calls it the great flattening, where the goal is fewer layers between top execs and the people actually building product. Google's former HR chief under Eric Schmidt tells me that hyperscalers are likely cutting staff to fund chips, and they're very pricey AI engineers. But he also warns that gutting entry-level roles now will leave a hollowed-out pipeline and a shortage of managers later. Leslie?
Mackenzie, it's all really fascinating. There's a great book that I read earlier this year called The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee, and they talk about these principles that some of the most successful tech companies have employed in order to be successful in terms of their organizational structure, one of which is ownership and kind of giving employees more control over their daily lives, cutting out some of the middle management. And I just wonder, as we think about some of these companies and how they're shifting the way they think, they've gotten really big and successful because they've employed some of these principles. Do you feel like those are now changing as a result of the technology and just the ultimate pressure and CapEx spending and everything that's happening? It needs to be even more flat and nimble than kind of the structure that's gotten them the success so far.
So with Alphabet, it's almost been this boomerang effect where under Eric Schmidt, he introduced something called the Rule of Seven, where you couldn't be a manager unless you managed at least 7 people. And that was designed with a view to basically spread them out so they didn't become bureaucrats, spread them a little bit thin. So they aggressively strayed from that. And we're seeing that show up with the kind of cuts that they're making in the past year. But to your larger question, is it a shift in technology that's behind this rethinking of the org chart? And it really is a combination of factors. I mean, this began in 2023 during Mark Zuckerberg's year of really returning to efficiency, something that Wall Street has rewarded the stock for after a punishing stretch. And that was about expediting the decision-making process, really looking to compress that layer that separates the top executives who are making decisions from people who are actually building the tech. And now the people that they're hiring, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these advanced AI engineers, they want to really connect them with those who are in a position to expedite product decisions in this expedited race. And so some of the decisions at Amazon, for example, looking to compress that ratio of managers to individual contributors, Morgan Stanley says that could lead to 14,000 cuts in management roles under Andy Jassy.
Yeah, I feel like one day it's going to flip and it's going to be the managers overseeing like 7 AI agents or AI bots, and there will be no just kind of player employees there. Mackenzie, thank you so much for following that story for us. Mackenzie.
Cheese will be next.
Next on Squawk Pod, Ukraine's largest telecom and digital operator, Kyivstar, recently went public on the Nasdaq via SPAC, and we'll talk to the CEO about doing business amid a war.
It's a quite difficult background. It's a war in the country. Okay, but I think that we are moving, we are developing, so we are going ahead despite the very difficult circumstances.
You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC.
You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Sorkin, along with Leslie Picker and Wilfred Frost. The sprint seems to always begin post-Labor Day. Here we go. For some people, it's already begun, I think, given some schools already begun.
The telco company Kyivstar made its public debut earlier this month on the Nasdaq via SPAC, marking the first time a Ukraine company has gone public on a U.S. exchange. Joining us now in a First on CNBC interview is the Kyivstar CEO, Alexander Komarov. The company's ringing the bell at the Nasdaq this morning. A very good morning to you. Congratulations.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Is it hard to feel elated, whether it was the SPAC listing or ringing the bell, given what's going on back home?
So it's a kind of major event for the Ukrainian economy. This is a major event for the company. So I think that we are proud. At the same time, of course, it's a quite difficult background. It's a war in the country. Okay, but I think that we are moving, we are developing, so we are going ahead despite a very difficult circumstances. And this is a kind of proof that country can develop in a very, very difficult circumstances.
Why did you list when you did? I think you've got a big majority shareholder. You didn't need the capital despite the tough time. It was a SPAC listing. What was the thought process behind it?
We have a thesis that actually direct listing of the operational companies of the VEON holding group will be able to unlock value for the shareholders. And as far as I see right now, we have proven that it is a kind of true. Since the beginning of our listing, the value of the company grew around 20%. Okay, and I think this is a kind of fundamental result. And also it has been proven through the very low redemption rate that we were able to achieve through the SPAC process.
Where is your coverage across Ukraine? I mean, obviously a telco company, you've got mobile, fixed line, and there's a deal with Starlink that we'll come to. And how would you think about continuing to serve customers or continuing to use spectrum you might have in lands that are sort of controlled by Russia at the moment or might become formally part of Russia? How do you think about that?
We are servicing only territories that are under control of the Ukraine, okay? And we are trying to consider ourselves as a digital service operator rather than pure telco provider. Because right now, what we have is a mobile telco, we are market leader. We have fixed broadband business, we are also market leader, but we are also developing a number of digital services like health, digital health, like ride-hailing, where we're market leader, like entertainment, where we're one of the market leaders. So we position ourselves as a digital service provider with a telco license. And we are servicing the whole Ukraine. As an example, we have access to half of the Ukrainian households with our fixed broadband infrastructure. We have coverage 98% by population with LTE technology. And with the Starlink addition, we will be able to cover 100% of the territory with first OTT messaging and then with mobile broadband services through satellite.
So Starlink you see as a partner, not a threat to your business, but more importantly to Ukraine as a whole, there's been a lot of coverage of this. Would the war effort have been possible without Starlink support?
Starlink is an essential element of the Ukrainian national security for the time being. Okay, and I think that direct-to-cell services will strengthen actually not only humanitarian aspect of the telco services that we provide to our customers, but also a security aspect that are important during the war.
In terms of what's likely to happen in the short term, whilst we've got you, I know you might not want to get into the politics, but clearly there's a big gap between Russia and Ukraine in terms of what would be required to reach a ceasefire or a peace deal. Do you think it's likely this year, next year, or not?
I don't want to speculate. I'm very much focused as a CEO of a big critical infrastructure and critical service companies. I'm trying to be as prudent as possible in my forecast, in our forecast, okay? So that's why we do not provision end of the war this year or next year. So we rely on our ability to run and to develop business in a very difficult circumstances. And it seems to me that we have proven this ability because we have demonstrated growth, marginality during all 3.5 years of the full-scale war.
Can I ask you in sort of a different way, which is obviously you chose to go public via SPAC here in the U.S. Can you explain your reasoning for listing in the U.S. on the Nasdaq as opposed to anywhere else in the world?
There are two rational arguments. The first one, our parent company VEON is listed on Nasdaq. The second one is a special conditions that were signed between Nasdaq and Ukrainian government. And the third one, we are making history. We are the first ever Ukrainian entity to be listed on the American Stock Exchange.
Do you think it helps there's obviously talk of a minerals deal. Does it help long term the idea that America will help protect, or the West will help protect Ukraine if more Ukrainian companies list here or list in London or the like? Do you think that will help or not?
I'm sure yes. I'm sure yes, because I think we should strengthen our security cooperation, we should strengthen our cultural cooperation, but it is also important to strengthen our business cooperation. As an example, Ukrainian American Chamber of Commerce is one of the strongest in the Eastern Europe because we have a lot of American businesses that are present in Ukraine for the time being, that are developing business, that are investing in business. Kyivstar is one of the example. We committed to invest $1 billion into the Ukrainian economy from 23 to 27. And we are progressing with this.
Alexander, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations on ringing the bell today, and more broadly, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, a debate taking place in schools and in homes as we start this new school year. Access to phones during the school day. Journalist and Yale lecturer Joanne Lipman.
There's a study in Singapore that found that if you take phones away from the students, it actually, their performance, academic performance declines because of their anxiety.
And member of the Smartphone Free Childhood Council, Emily Body.
So we find that students relax into the day more easily, knowing that everyone's phone is put away.
You're listening to Squawk Pod today with Andrew Ross Sorkin, Leslie Picker, and Wilfred Frost. Here's Andrew.
Students heading back to school, a national debate heating up over whether cell phones belong in classrooms, with more states moving to impose new restrictions this upcoming school year. 35 states have rules limiting phones and electronic devices in schools. Joining us right now to talk about it is Joanne Lipman, a Yale University lecturer and a CNBC contributor. Also, Emily Body, a Smartphone Free Childhood U.S. Council member. I want to thank both of you. It's great to see you. There's a big question about this, and I know a lot of parents go back and forth. A lot of people don't want the phones in the classroom themselves, but also then want the kids to have cell phones so that if there's an emergency, they can get to them. What say you, Joanne?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Good to see you. So I am on the side of keep them in schools, but with some limits. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and there's a lot of research now that's come out behind this. So first of all, as a parent, I've got to say just the safety issue, period. I'm a parent. I would want my kids to be able to reach me in the event of a true emergency. In terms of the academics, however, look, we live in the real world. We all use our cell phones. These are important tools, and we need to teach our kids to use them responsibly and ethically. And they're going to grow up and they're going to be the people who are going to build on these tools. And it's really important that we don't sort of bury our heads in the sand. And there's a lot of practical uses. I would say limits, right? I'm all totally fine with this idea that their cell phone must be in a pocket, must be zipped. You cannot use it for social reasons. That would be, a demerit or whatever, detention. But I do think in terms of the classroom, there's practical reasons. I actually use it at Yale with my own students. If they've got an assignment or I'm showing something that's an illustration, I'm like, take out your phones and take a picture of that. You want to have that there for those kinds of reasons. But there's also studies. I was really fascinated to find there's a study in Singapore that found that if you take phones away from the students, it actually, their performance, academic performance declines because of their anxiety. Now, this is not really great for your mental health, but they found that even having the phone in your pocket and not being allowed to use it was actually helping them with their mental health and with their academic performance.
Okay, I think Emily's on the other end of this. What do you think?
Yeah. So thank you for having me, Andrew. We strongly advocate actually for bell-to-bell policy, which means that phones are turned off and inaccessible to students from the first bell of the day to the last bell of the day. And to Joanne's point, what we find is that if students do have access to their phone, even during a social period, their focus during the class period is on what's happening on the phone. And so we find that students relax into the day more easily, knowing that everyone's phone is put away. With regards to emergencies, I'm a mom. I have young children. I completely get the emotional response to wanting to be in contact with my child during an emergency. And we know that children are less safe in school if they have a phone during an emergency. Police responders, first responders, they are very clear about this. Students need to be focusing on the adult who is giving them critical instructions for their safety. We need to keep cellular networks clear and open during an emergency so that first responders can be communicating efficiently and quickly. And we don't want inaccurate information spreading during an emergency over text or over social media because it can confuse the process and cause panic. So while children with phones in their pockets during the day are not safer, they will learn less, they will be more lonely, and they will be more anxious. And when it comes to the education piece, we couldn't agree more. Kids absolutely need more education around digital technology, use, and risks, but we need to educate without access. So we do this with myriad other things in school.
Emily, I want to get back to Joanne, but I just have one question just as a follow-up here. What do you make of Joanne's point about the technology itself, which is that you want this next generation of kids to understand how to use a phone, hopefully responsibly? I'm not suggesting they can use it responsibly. I think part of the problem is there's an addiction level or element to it that we need to somehow fix. But I imagine in the future, by the way, I know kids, by the way, in middle school who are recording their teachers on the phone. You may say that's good or bad. And then now they're getting that turned into notes for them, which, by the way, may be good or bad too. But the point is that technology is moving so quickly. And if they don't have access to it, what does that do?
Yeah, so we really need kids to develop skills before screens. So there's critical thinking skills that come into play that will enable kids as they get older and their brain develops more to be able to use these tools more effectively. Look, we have to acknowledge that these devices are not designed for responsible use, right? As adults, we even struggle to use them appropriately. And so we really need to set foundational skills before we're enabling kids to skip all of the friction learning, right? Before they get to that point. And we often educate without access, right? Take financial literacy. We're not giving kids a high limit credit card and expecting them to go out and know what to do with it right away. We teach about responsibility. We teach about risk. And we view the 6 to 7 hour day of break from the phone actually part of the education, right? It creates better habits and better patterns. And we hear from students across the country that they're using their phones differently and they're using their phones less as a result of this break during every single school day.
Can I just make the point?
The floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to, it's just a little bit of history here. If you think about it, when Wikipedia came out, it was like, oh my God, our kids will never learn how to research. Google, they're never going to learn how to read. They're never going to learn anything because Google's going to tell them anything. I'm of a generation where I have older sisters, and when the pocket calculator first came out, they were banned from schools because kids will never, ever learn how to do math. So my point being, historically, every time we have these new technologies, there's a lot of fear about them. And then ultimately we learn how to use them as tools. And it does, and in the best case, it actually helps you to learn. And by the way, there's another study that I came across in Taiwan of elementary school students that actually found that students with cell phones in schools actually performed better than those without. And the point that those researchers were trying to make was that banning schools might unintentionally widen the education gap because your lower income students are more likely to have phones than they are to have either internet access or other devices at home. And so therefore you are depriving them of a really important tool that could ultimately hurt their performance as well.
So can I respond?
Go for it, Emily.
I just wanted to note that, if we were talking about tools that provided a simple function of giving educational tools, that would be one thing. But these smartphones provide so much else. And because they're primarily used by students for social reasons and for gaming and for all myriad other things, it's very difficult to argue that a child is going to be able to filter out when they're using it as a tool and when they're using it socially. And what we see in schools is that students are spending time off task using their devices more than they're paying attention in class. And so we need to be able
I just want to agree with you on that point, which is why I really do feel like you have to, I know we're debating, but I agree with you on this point that that is really important to keep it focused on the academics and not the social.
Okay, here's the deal. We're all going to go to lunch together, and there'll be a portion of the lunch, no phones, and another portion of lunch, you can have the phone out if you like. Thank you for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
We're in. Thank you.
We need to thank my co-partners in crime for the week here, Wilf and Leslie. Want to thank you for joining us on this final week of August. Lots of folks on the beach, but all of us working. So very much appreciated and great to see you. And maybe we'll make it an annual habit.
Well,
really
may I just say thank you for having me, Andrew. I love CNBC's, I love Squawk Box, and congratulations on the big Squawk Box anniversary.
Yes, 3-0.
30 years. 30 years is coming up. We'll probably be making a lot bigger of a deal in September about all of that. But thank you for a preview, and thank you both for being with us. Really appreciated it.
That's the podcast for today, for the week, and for August. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 a.m. Eastern. And it has been weekday mornings at 6 a.m. for years. September marks the 30th anniversary of our show. Hit that follow button right now so you don't miss any of our celebratory episodes still to come. Now, we're dark on Monday, but we'll meet you back here on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.